Hello and welcome. How accountable is the Catholic Church, and could the legacy of child abuse scandals change the traditionally secretive nature of the Vatican? As the Pope makes his first visit to Britain, he travels in the growing wake of calls for justice for abuse victims. Despite the ceremonious welcome Queen Elizabeth gave Pope Benedict XVI, he's likely to spend the next few days facing a tough audience as he tries to rescue the Church's battered image in the UK and beyond. Last week in Belgium, the Church's credibility received yet another blow when hundreds of sex abuse victims came forward. And this week, a report in Britain showed that half of the clergymen jailed there for paedophilia remain in priesthood after being released, with many still receiving financial benefits. Pope Benedict faced his skeptics by pledging to do everything possible to clean up the Catholic Church. Today we ask, what justice is there for those sexually abused by Catholic priests, and should the Vatican face an international court of law? Remember, you can join our conversation with your SMSs and emails. Well, joining us from London is international human rights lawyer Geoffrey Robertson, who's appeared in landmark cases in constitutional, criminal and international law around the world. He's also the author of the book, The Case of the Pope, Vatican Accountability for Human Rights Abuses. Mr. Robertson, welcome to the show, sir. It's good to have you with us. And I have to ask you, the Pope has come out and expressed great sadness and said, over the revelations of the widespread abuse, he said that it didn't act quickly or decisively enough. What else would you have liked to hear him saying?
Well, I'm afraid the Pope today, on the airplane, the flying Pope-mobile, as it were, said, I didn't know, I was shocked. And this is redolent, I'm afraid, of war criminals, of Milosevic, of the Nuremberg trials, where they all said, we didn't know. And he blamed his inferiors, he blamed the bishops, he blamed the church officials, he blamed everyone but himself. But his particular problem, and this is being pointed out to him very politely in Britain, because Britain is a very polite society, that he was actually in charge since 1981. He's been the prefect, the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which disciplines priests. And I'm afraid that it just won't wash to say that he didn't know, because he did, because under canon law, which is the church law, all requests for defrocking had to go to him. And there were a number of cases that have come out of American court cases which show that he refused to defrock paedophile priests, including one who'd sodomized 200 deaf boys in Wisconsin. He refused to defrock them. And so he knew, and he declined to act in that 24-year period before he became Pope. And even after he became Pope, even a couple of months ago, he refused to adopt the zero-tolerance policy, one child abused and you're out, and he refused to make it a law that those bishops who became aware of evidence of paedophile priests should hand it over to the police. Mm-hmm. So he's got a long way to go, and I think in Britain, while he's being politely received, as I say, these questions will not go away.
Well, I wanted Mr. Robertson, his supporters say that time while he was as the prefect of the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, that very few cases actually would have come his way because so many are dealt with at a local level, they're dealt with by other Vatican offices. So it's possible that he didn't get quite as many cases as some suggest.
Well, I've considered this in my book. I hope it's fair. It's not the case against the Pope, it's the case of the Pope. But I publish the actual rules of canon law, which required him, as head of the CDF, to be informed of all these cases. And whenever there was a defrocking in question, he had to make the decision. And I think the case that really, as it were, convicts him of accountability, if nothing else, is the case of Father Maciel, the monster priest of Mexico, who founded an order so that he could sodomize the boys in it. He was a bigamist. He even raped his own children. And we're talking about rape because children can't give consent. And he was, as Cardinal Ratzinger, the Pope knew about this from 1998. He had the sworn evidence of 11 victims, and he didn't act on it when he allowed the Pope John Paul II to bless Father Maciel. And when he became Pope in 2006, he didn't defrock this monster priest. He didn't hand all the evidence over to the police. He instead simply invited him to lead a quiet life out of the glare of the cameras that had started to catch up with him. So I'm afraid that there is a real issue here, and it can only be resolved on evidence, and it can only be resolved on opening the CDF files, and that's something, of course, that the Vatican refuses to do. It would be a very good start if it set up a commission to examine the CDF files over the last 30 years to decide what had been hidden and what had been covered up and what should come out.
Now, there is a word of an investigation, though, going forward by the Vatican, top-level investigation into the Irish Catholic Church's handling of clerical child abuse after the Pope's visit to Britain. It's due to start. The papal examination, or apostolic visitation, as it's called, of the Catholic diocese and orders of priests and nuns is due to begin within weeks. Isn't that a good sign, at least, the Catholic Church is moving forward? Plus, the Pope doesn't seem to be shying away from the subject now.
Well, it's all been done. There have been 3 judicial commissions in Ireland. 2 of them reported last year, one with 9 volumes of evidence. And their conclusion was that child abuse in Catholic boys' institutions in Ireland was endemic. That was their word. It happened all the time. It was widespread and systematic. And they went further. They said that in all these decisions, the Church in Ireland, as advised by the papal nuncio, who was Rome's representative, had put the interests of the Church and its reputation ahead of the interests of children. So, in a sense, Ireland is old news. The real issue, and what really must happen, is an investigation of the Vatican, because the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, is the head of this organization. He does bear command responsibility for it. It is his rules that the bishops obeyed, because what you've got to understand, you can't blame the bishops as the Pope and his defenders do, because the bishops were operating under his orders, and his orders, canon law orders, to keep everything utterly secret, pontifical secrecy, which means that once anyone complains about a paedophile priest in the canon law system, everyone must be utterly quiet and keep it secret forever. Otherwise they get excommunicated. That's the punishment for breaching pontifical secrecy. So I think the real problem gets back to the Pope himself, to the rules of canon law, to the use of canon law, which is a medieval doctrine. It has it's all done in writing. There's no cross-examination, no forensic tests, and no punishment. No one goes to prison. The preferred way of dealing with a paedophile priest is to actually make him pray for his victims. And of course victims don't want the prayers of their abusers. They want justice, and they want to ensure that the abuser doesn't abuse other children.
So on that issue of canon law and the pontifical secrecy, the Vatican has not forbidden victims to consult the police, and recent developments in the law and comments from the Vatican instruct bishops to cooperate and to help local authorities. Is there anything more you think they could do? I mean,
I'm sorry. That's not accurate. They don't. First of all, they haven't lifted the pontifical secrecy, so you can't inform the police. If the police prosecute, they only do so as a result of information that's come from outside the circle of the complainant and the process. So they haven't. In the last edict that the Pope issued in July of this year, the new norms De Gravioribus Delictus, the Pope refused to impose a mandatory reporting direction. So it is no part of canon law that the bishops must report evidence of paedophile behavior to the police.
Okay. A quick thought. We had a number of emails from viewers who, a lot of them are questioning the validity of charging the Pope with any crimes. If I could read a couple of them back to you, sir. The first one from Bangladesh is from Mohammed Munshi, excuse me, who says, since the Pope was aware of the allegations and failed to both punish those responsible, he should be criminally liable for this gross act of omission. And the second one from Malawi says, how can someone face trials for crimes committed by others? It's misguided to think the Pope is solely responsible. Now, I know you argue that the Pope is not entitled to state immunity as a matter of international law because the Vatican's not a state. What grounds do you believe that provides for the Pope to directly face criminal charges?
Well, I think we come at it this way. There has been terrible, appalling child abuse. Figures indicate that tens of thousands of children have been raped by priests. Evidence, and we don't have it all, of course, or even part of it, but we know that the Pope, as Cardinal Ratzinger, was in charge. He was the commander. And there is a doctrine in international law, which I'm afraid has been necessary to punish the Japanese general Yamashita and Milosevic and so forth, necessary to punish those who don't, of course, commit the atrocity themselves, those who may not want the atrocity to happen at all, may be totally opposed. And let me say, I'm sure this Pope is utterly appalled. There's no doubt that he's sincere in being appalled by it, but who turn a blind eye to it or show gross negligence because they don't punish the perpetrators. And this really is the case that I think Benedict would have to consider against himself, is whether over the last 30 years he has failed to punish or to allow to be punished, or to I mean, there are many cases that have been exposed of the Vatican approving the traffic in paedophile priests. Someone is caught in one jurisdiction and taken to another country, particularly to Latin America and Africa.
We have to take a short break here. When we return, what concrete steps can the Catholic Church do to heal the damage? More of that discussion when we come back. Welcome back. The Catholic Church has been plagued by a devastating paedophile scandal dating back decades. Is the Vatican doing enough to heal this deep crisis in faith? I'm discussing those issues with Australian-born human rights lawyer and author Geoffrey Robertson. And here's, sir, in what many see as an attempt to deflect attention from the Pope's UK visit, the words of the Archbishop of Liverpool, Patrick Kelly, who's saying the role of other organisations working with children should be investigated too. This is what he had to say. Other groups were working with young people, and we found that the question of child abuse, above all, occurs within families, and you know that as a fact. Now, I wonder to what degree the bishops and the people, the members of the church, are trying to rally behind the Pope and help him in this time of crisis.
The church is split. That is, from the Bishop of Liverpool, an example of trying to divert the question. It's a very unattractive thing to say, oh, well, other institutions have child abuse, so we shouldn't be blamed. Every institution which has child abuse should be blamed. The statistics, the John Jay College, a very eminent college of criminologists in America, found 4.3% of Catholic priests were pedophiles or child molesters at least. And now I think it's accepted 5%. Some people say 9% in other countries. These are the reports. And if you think there are 400,000 priests in the world, if it were 5%, then 20,000 priests would be molesters. Most of them have multiple victims, sometimes dozens, sometimes up to several hundred. So, you know, we are talking about tens of thousands of children being raped, and I don't think the Catholic Church can divert attention by the unattractive suggestion that we do it, but so do you. Okay. I think that, and it's this kind of thing that is, I feel very worried, and I wrote the book because I was worried, because I work with Catholic organizations against the death penalty and in relation to human rights in Africa, very wonderful organizations like Caritas and CAFOD, and you know, they are losing support, and they are being, in a sense, tarnished by the failure of the Vatican and the Pope to get a grip on this problem.
Mm-hmm. We've got a question.
I think there are solutions.
Right, so I'll ask you in a moment about that. An email that came from Nigeria from Quinise Eremise, who says, putting the Pope on trial by the ICC would be like trying an imam for acts of terrorism. It's the Catholic priests who should face charges. Now, I wonder, the Church does say a lot of these cases date decades back, and that it is starting to clean up its act, that there is a dramatic reduction in incidents and so on. Does that give you some faith in some progress in the Church?
Well, no, because the progress has been very slow and it's been tinkering at the edges. I think what the Church has to do is to forswear the use of canon law at all. The canon law is for sin. Canon law is appropriate as a disciplinary measure for priests who ordain women, for heresy, for schism, whatever. But it's not appropriate for dealing with a serious crime. That should be a matter for the criminal law. And once the criminal law has spoken, once the priest has been publicly tried and convicted, there should be zero tolerance. He should not be allowed to remain a priest, as has happened in England and Britain. And Britain is accepted to be the most forward-thinking in this respect. Canon law must adopt, I think, what is called the paramountcy principle, that the interests of the child must come first. It must trump the interests of the reputation of the church or its fear of being sued for damages. There must be protection for whistleblowers. There have been terrible cases of a few priests who have spoken out. I deal with one of them in my book. He exposed a paedophile ring among priests. He had to go to the newspapers because the bishops wouldn't act. The priests were convicted and imprisoned, and he was ostracized, and his fellows said to him, "How can you betray your brother?" Because it's a sodality. And he said, "A paedophile is no brother of mine." But he was so driven to drink, he was ostracized, sent to Coventry, as we say, and he ended up committing suicide. So the church has to, however hard it is, when you've got this band of brothers, as it were, the need has to be to blow the whistle on those who are molesting children. So that's another rule that the church has to adopt.
Okay, there is a sense that with all these scandals being exposed, that there's perhaps even a movement to go for the Vatican's jugular, so to speak. And I wonder to what degree what's happening now with the Catholic Church is also multiplied by the current climate in the world, the economic climate, the sense of disillusionment. I wonder if the case against the Church has become greater than the actual situation warrants sometimes.
Well, that is what the church would like to think, but I fear that it is got to be grappled with. I think there are more scandals to come. I mean, we haven't yet had proper inquiries in Africa, Philippines, and we hear travelers' tales of trafficking in paedophile priests to those countries. There's a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada over the treatment by church schools of indigenous people. There are over 90 priests are in jail in Australia. It is a worldwide phenomenon, almost an epidemic. And I think the church has to look at its practices. What causes this incidence of child abuse? On one hand, there's celibacy, there's the masturbation is a mortal sin, there is the bottling up of this sexual frustration and the refusal to have women priests. On the other hand, there is the introduction of children at the age of 7 to believe that the priest is the agent of God. They have their first communion. He is the one who does the magic with the bread and the wine. They have their first confession. He is the all-powerful figure. And so when the priest succumbs to lust or asks the child to do something wrong sexually, the child unflinchingly obeys. I think the church has to ask itself, is it right to indoctrinate children at such a young age to believe the priest is the agent of God? It has to begin to ask itself, is it right to insist on celibacy? These are the sort of questions that I think are being put by the Pope's visit.
I wonder, sir, with the current situation for the church, the kind of pressure it's under, and the financial hits it's taken too. There are a lot of people believing the church now is in a very difficult situation financially. Whether that might be the ultimate motivation, the ultimate incentive for greater transparency and reform within the church.
I would have thought, as I say, I wrote this book, The Case of the Pope, not from any hostility to the church, but from trying to persuade intelligent Catholics that transparency is the way forward. They've got nothing to lose if they hand over their evidence of paedophile behavior to the police, because then they won't get sued with aggravated damages aggravated by their cover-up. it is in the interests of the Church to take all these steps to minimize offending against children, and indeed to refurbish the image of the papacy. At the end of the day, there is a strange, some people may think, old British habit or tradition that if something goes wrong on your watch, you resign. This is something that goes back a long way, and it is still the thing to do, the right thing to do, and it does. And I think if this Pope, who is 83 and has this massive task ahead of him, were to accept that appalling things happened on his watch, and if he were to, as it were, take the sins of the fathers upon himself and simply resign,
right.
There are precedents for it many centuries ago, I think that would be a wonderful example and an honourable example that would help the Church and certainly help victims, because I think they're pretty sick of hearing just words, and it would be an action of enormous symbolism that would, I think, do wonders for the Church, and it would enable a younger Pope to be elected, who could perhaps have more ability to get to grips with and to reform the system.
Okay, well, Geoffrey Robertson, I thank you, sir, for taking the time and talking with us.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. And be sure to tune in all next week when we will bring you the show from New York as world leaders gather for the UN General Assembly. We'll start off our coverage by talking with Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi about some of the country's most pressing challenges, including its perceived image deficit, tensions with its neighbours, and rising Taliban insurgency. Join us for that from me and the team. See you next time.